I'm Meta Spencer. Today we're going to go to Stanford. My alma mater is Berkeley, so there was always a little rivalry between Berkeley and Stanford in my day, but it was mostly people who were interested in sports. I don't think anything else. And I wasn't very interested in football. So, is there any rivalry anymore between Berkeley and Stanford?
Sure, there's an intellectual rivalry.
Oh,
They're both very good places, and I
yeah.
think there's a lot of mutual respect too.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, I used to go occasionally to Stanford, but mostly not. Anyway, you've already spoken, and I now I'm going to introduce you because I'm going to have a conversation with James Fishkin, who is the Janet M. Peck Chair in International Communication in the Department of Communication at Stanford University. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's one of my titles.
Do you want more? I mean, we always have all afternoon. We can give people your
Well, I don't,
resume.
I don't want to bore people with titles, but I'm
Right.
also connected to political science, and I'm a senior fellow of the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies, and I'm director of something that I call the Deliberative Democracy Lab, where
Mhm.
we conduct
Yeah.
projects all over the world.
Well, I know about that because I've read your book, or at least I've skimmed your book. And I certainly admire what you're doing and want to emulate it, to at least to a degree. And in fact, I am emulating it, but before reading your book, so I'm doing it wrong. Um, this is I've started something an inquiry into the risks of AI,
Mhm.
and we have a 5 week long series of conversations with about 10, 12. Today there were 11 people who, and we have every week for an hour, um, 5 consecutive weeks, we'll be having these conversations. And everybody who's involved will do a little homework beforehand, look at some of these common readings or watching a video. I'm going to admit my colleague, Leonard Cosals, who's apparently just now arriving, and I'll introduce him to you as well. But this series is one in which we have a dozen or so people who are looking into different aspects of AI, and we are looking into our concerns about the risks of it, and we will at the end produce some sort of document about our concerns and make it available for anybody who wants to do any further work in terms of lobbying or other kinds of comments. I want to introduce you here to my new arrival, my colleague and friend, Leonid Cosals. Leon is a sociologist who taught many years at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, but about 15 years ago, relocated for political reasons to Canada, and has been teaching in the criminology department until recently, or at least sometimes he's still doing it. So this is Dr. Fishkin, Leon. Um, so we have been holding these conversations. This was the second one today, finished about an hour ago, and it's private. We do it by Zoom, and the conversations themselves are private, but except for the fifth one, which will be the final one, in which we try to see whether or not we have reached any conclusions about what our policies and recommendations would be about safety issues. And so I did not have a common set of questions. What you do, as I understand it, with your deliberative democracy project, is that you ask participants to do a before and after questionnaire, so you can see whether they change their positions on various points throughout the conversation. And then you also have a control group that watches, that fills out the questionnaire. So having read your book, I immediately made up a questionnaire and
Mhm.
had have asked people to begin doing it. I posted it on Substack, so I will probably get some comments from people who are, of course, not members of our panel of discussants. And that's what I've learned from you so far. And I want you to probably show me other ways in which I can contribute to what I think is a really important uh, necessity for people to participate more and deliberate about political issues before going to the real voting booth. So there's my story. Um, let's see what you think about what we are doing so far, but also I really want to hear a lot about deliberative democracy and your policies, especially, by the way, what I was trying to hope for originally was I would love to have done it as a citizens' assembly, but I don't think I should call it that because we can't do sortition. We just have to take what we can get in terms of people who want to participate. So it's all a self-selected group of people. And I think citizens' assembly, one of the key features of that is um, the use of lottery, choosing people by random sampling, and we can't do that. So I didn't want to call it a citizens' assembly, but I noted in your book that you are not 100% in favor of citizens' assembly or sortition procedures anyway. So I don't know whether that's where we want to start, but I want to let you tell me what you do, and I'll be quiet now.
Okay. So what I do is it's very simple and commonsensical, but it's led me on an extensive journey. Um, we take larger samples than the citizens' assemblies, more rigorously recruited, so that we know that they're representative in attitudes as well as demographics. The famous citizens' assemblies in France or in Ireland, for example, didn't even collect attitudinal data about where the people were starting. I think the civil servants, my friend Jane Souter, who did the Irish ones, says the civil servants wouldn't let them collect the data. Uh,
Why?
so I have no idea, but that's what happens when government gets involved. Anyway, I don't want to talk too much about the citizens' assemblies because I think it has benefits in the sense that anytime you get ordinary people discussing complex issues and you give them a little bit of an infrastructure and a safe space to discuss it, wonderful things happen. But better things happen on our model, I think, because we're trying to assess what the will of the people really would be if people thought about the issue in depth. And if the sample is not representative to begin with, you can't use it as a representation of where the people end up. In the French case, they selected they sent out 350,000 text messages, and they ended up with 150 people who volunteered to spend 6 months, then a year, then up to 2 years thinking about climate. Now, I can't believe that those people were not more interested in climate than the general population. Otherwise, they wouldn't have volunteered for the assignment. So when we do it, we take random samples that are demonstrably representative because we also have a control group that only has to answer a questionnaire, and the people are randomly assigned to the treatment condition, the deliberation condition, as opposed to the control group. And they
Excuse me,
are
but this initial questionnaire, do you tell them what the topic is going to be?
Yes, but they don't know if they're just answering a questionnaire or if there's anything else they're going to do.
I
So, assuming that we have very good survey partners who can get people to answer questions on almost any topic, uh, we we then randomly assign, as you must do in an experiment, between treatment and control group, and the people who actually turn up to deliberate are indistinguishable, largely, from the people who just take the questionnaire at the initial time of recruitment and then several weeks later at the end of the process. So we know that they're representative. We have the data to show that on all the issues that are going to be discussed, as well as demographics. So we've been using NORC at the University of Chicago, which is sort of the gold-plated version of survey research, and they are extremely good at getting the people initially drawn into a sample to actually complete the questionnaire. They're very persistent and persuasive, and they have a great track record. So it's sort of like, I was going to say driving a Cadillac, but a Cadillac's not so great anymore. Driving a high-end car, and uh, so in any case, it's about the best that can be done. So we get these representative samples, and what do? After they fill out the questionnaire, the people randomly assigned to deliberate are recruited for a weekend of discussion, either face to face, which is how we did many of the projects. We've done 160 of these projects around the world, or they are recruited for an online process, which is as much like the face-to-face as possible. And we have special technology which moderates the discussions. It's AI assisted, but people see each other in small groups of 10, like a Zoom, but it controls the queue for discussion. Each person can only speak 45 seconds at a time. It nudges people who haven't signed up to speak. It actually creates very equal participation. It intervenes if people are not civil, and it convenes the group of 10 to agree on the key questions that they want to ask panels of competing experts who answer those questions in a Zoom webinar from different points of view. So there's no predetermined conclusion. Rather, we want people to weigh the trade-offs about different policy proposals. The root of the very word deliberation, going way back, is weighing the pros and cons, weighing the trade-offs. And that's what the people do when they consider the arguments. They have a briefing document which spells out the background on the issue and clearly states the proposals that are on offer. These are things that could actually be done to solve a problem. And they usually represent, some of them lean left, some of them lean right, some of them are just idiosyncratic but possible. But they all pose trade-offs because they're all meaningful proposals. And as much as well as I do, that proposals that might actually change the status quo almost always involve some trade-offs. And that's what we want the people to consider.
Let me stop you for a moment, because back there a minute ago, you were referring to it as if the moderator is a program or
Yes.
some sort of app. And if so, I want to know about that. Have you developed a
Yes.
okay.
Yes. With Stanford computer scientists, we have, and you can look it up on our deliberative democracy website. Just go to deliberation.stanford.edu, and you will see a section on the Stanford online deliberation platform. I wanted to call it Alice because my colleague Alice Hsu has a very nice voice, and it's her voice that's on the program. But she was too modest to allow me to do that. So we haven't agreed on another name. So that's what it's called.
But could other people use it? Could I use it?
Well, you could, but it requires some preparation on the issue to be applied in terms of the briefing materials. We also have a video version summation of the briefing materials for those who were less comfortable with a long written document, um, development of the pros and cons. It has to be adapted to our format, but we often allow other groups to use it, provided they're using, provided they make the necessary preparations.
Mhm.
So,
Of course,
but
sorry, but I mean, it is true that the selection of the briefing materials is extremely important. And I did it all myself, so there's no way I can say that this is an unbiased thing. I did my
yeah,
best to be unbiased. And the problem is, it's not as if these comments or the things that I was reading are lined up on two sides, this
yeah,
side, that
yeah.
side.
So what we
They're
do,
all over the map, different kinds of attitudes and so
well,
on. So
yeah,
that
well, that's
it's not just a yes, this
of
polarization.
course, but that's particularly for a less structured dialogue. What we have found is that a dialogue that is structured and organized in a certain way has remarkable effects in terms of getting people to think about the issues and indeed change their opinions. But we have no priors as to what direction they're supposed to change their opinions
Mhm.
towards. And we usually have a briefing committee, an advisory committee that surveys the proposed briefing document, and they always represent different points of view on the issue, sometimes sharply contrasting points of view on the issue. But the saving grace is we're not asking them to agree with the briefing document. We're asking them to agree whether the briefing document is balanced and accurate. Uh, and so, is this a good statement of that point of view? Is this are all the facts cited accurate or reasonably accurate? Is this a clear expression of a statement about a proposal that could be implemented? And is this a good account of the trade-offs? So we always have an extensive advisory committee. If you look at the one we did on climate and energy that's on our website, we've done 160 of these. But I was just looking at that advisory group. I don't know, didn't count them all, but it must have had 30 people on it, or some large number, and representing very different points of view about the issue. And some were sources of skepticism or hesitation about climate, and some were very forceful about it. But in other words, it was a balanced committee that vetted a balanced document as a basis for discussion. So then the next step, so over the course of the weekend of deliberation, uh, let's say you have an hour and a half small group discussion on the first part of the agenda, which ends in the last 15 minutes for people to identify the key questions they want to ask about that set of issues. And they, on the platform, well, in the face-to-face, they do the same with a human moderator, but on the platform, they type out suggestions and they collectively edit them, and then they vote by ranked choice voting until they get the top two questions that are most important to them to get expressed in the plenary session. And all the groups do that. So in the climate and energy one, that's top of mind today because I was reviewing that this morning for something else. And we had 1,000 deliberators, and we had 100 small groups of 10 who did this, and their questions went to the plenary sessions. Of course, there was overlap in the questions, but so we picked specimen versions of each kind of question, and those were directed to the competing experts. Then the people returned to the small groups again and continued with the next part of the agenda. And all this, so they alternated small group discussions and plenary sessions, an hour and a half for each, until the entire weekend was consumed. Then at the end, they take the same questionnaire as on first contact. And the discussions on the platform are extremely equal in terms of seconds. We have automatically get transcripts of everything that's said, and we have an LLM model, large language model, that will assess the arguments and give us a digest of all the arguments, pro and con, that people are using. So we have a good sense of what's been discussed. And we have the post-deliberation questionnaire, which is basically the same as the initial questionnaire. So we have pre and post for the deliberators and pre and post for the control group so that we can actually assess as an experiment, as a national experiment, how people changed and why. Most important, why they changed. So the first function that this serves is to answer the basic question, what would the people really think under good practical conditions for thinking about the issue? And very often they don't have those practical conditions because there's viral misinformation being spread into their social media enclaves and filter bubbles. There's misinformation. There are a lot of people who are not paying attention to complicated public policy issues anyway. And
Mhm.
then there are those few on either side of the issue who feel very strongly, but they may have no idea what's really motivating people on the other side. But those people, random sample, randomly assigned, are likely to be in their small groups, and they will discuss those together.
Mhm.
And so there are four functions that this is serving. The first is it gives an assessment of what the people would really think. And we have made that consequential all over the world in different countries, particularly on contested policy issues and on issues sometimes where the governments in question don't know quite what to do, but they want to share some responsibility for the decision with the public. They help us convene these things, also with university partners in that country. And very often, the results have a major effect on policy. So that's the first.
Well,
Uh,
now wait a minute, because you're referring to a whole lot of different things that you've done, and I'm dazzled by the fact that you've had a national move, assembly. You brought people for the whole U.S., I presume.
yeah.
This was an
Oh, we did.
face-to-face meeting.
We've done many of those. We did five. I think it's five American One Room projects. We call them. You can see them on our website. But we've also, before working with a particular foundation that wanted to call them American One Room, that's the Helena Group Foundation. We were doing others on PBS that were under the heading By the People, where we had national deliberative polls with good samples, often recruited by NORC as well at the
Now,
University of
but
Chicago.
these were digital, right? They
These
were
were
not.
no national and national
They
broadcast
brought
too.
them together.
Jim Lair was a great friend of the process. He convened many of them.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
so we've done this. And we've done this nationally in a whole bunch of countries. If you look on our website or read the book, you'll see
I
that we've done
see.
160 of them. And in many cases, contested cases, they've actually been convened to help solve a difficult problem,
Mhm.
which they have.
Well, that is just wonderful. And the thing that I love to see is you refer to something called a day of deliberation, which
Mhm.
I presume, well, why don't you explain it? Because wouldn't that be wonderful if we could set it up before every big election? We have the whole country participate in local meetings of the kind that you are describing before they vote. Um,
Absolutely. So Bruce Ackerman's a friend of mine who's a professor at Yale Law School. He and I wrote a book a long time ago, back in 2004, called Deliberation Day. Um, and at that point, we were thinking of it as a face-to-face convening in communities all over the country, enabled by a national holiday. However, that was very expensive. Even the national holiday is very expensive. So, but what I've done of recently, in the last 10 years or so, we've developed this online platform, which cuts the costs dramatically and also allows for diverse groups, people from all over the country to be assigned, taking account of the time differences, the different time zones, to be assigned to groups that will be diverse. And what we find is that moderated discussion with diverse others is a kind of magic elixir that brings public opinion to life. And so we think that it's eminently practical to do this on our platform. And that's one of the things I advocate for in the book. And indeed, I've been spending a lot of my time now with a major, well, I'm not supposed to say the country, but with a major European country developing a version of this that we're going to have a demonstration of, hopefully in the next few months. Uh,
Wonderful.
and so the idea is that, and if we do it, and I've also gotten inquiries in various states to try to do this in the US.
Mhm.
So we're building towards trying to do mass deliberation on the platform, uh, uh, and that would be suitable also to do before an election. Uh, but we think there are lots of other entry points for deliberation apart from elections on issues. So we're pursuing this. But one of the things that we found that that is most intriguing, and which was featured by the New York Times in depth twice, and then we explained it in the American Political Science Review, um, uh, was that the deliberations not only show us what the public really would think if they thought about it, but it also depolarizes the opinions that are most polarized are the ones that depolarize. If it's not a polarized opinion to begin with, it doesn't depolarize. But for example, you'll see in the book some graphs that were published in the New York Times on how the Republicans very dramatically changed their views on immigration, going, for example, from 80% wanting to send all the undocumented immigrants to their quote unquote home countries to 40%. That's a drop of 40 points in a weekend. And how the Democrats also changed very dramatically on the most expensive social programs because they decided we couldn't afford some of them. And as much as 40 points as well. So public,
Universal basic income, if I were
yeah,
not mistaken.
that's right. That was one of them.
Mhm.
So both sides, the mean positions of the two parties moved substantially closer together. So this idea that we are inextricably divided is an illusion of the fact that most people, most of the time, don't even have any idea of the arguments on the other side, and many of them are not paying much attention anyway. But the opinions are not intractable, they're actually movable for good reasons,
Mhm.
which we can identify and articulate. So the depolarization is quite important because it's the extreme polarization that is paralyzing our democratic process.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Yes.
that's why I'm also interested in scaling the deliberative process, uh,
In what? Spoiling it, you said?
scaling it.
Scaling it. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
getting
Yeah.
more and more people to participate
Mhm.
because it has the point of it. The reason I devised it was to assess the will of the people. Because what's democracy without the will of the people? And right now we can't even assess the will of the people because there's so much confusion and misinformation and propaganda.
Yeah.
But the second purpose is that it seems, without our having any particular priors about how it should move opinion, it just as a byproduct, for the most divided issues, it moves the two parties substantially closer together.
Mhm.
So that is good for democracy. It also creates greater mutual respect, a greater sense of internal political efficacy. That is, people think they have opinions worth listening to, and they tend to vote in much higher percentages. And they also tend to do something else, which is also remarkable, which we also wrote about separately in the, not only was it covered again in the New York Times, but we wrote about it again in the American Political Science Review. Um, it created, it creates or fosters what I call deliberative voting. People not only tend to vote, but they tend to vote in a way that is coherently connected to what they deliberated about, to
Yeah.
their considered judgments, not just party loyalty.
Um,
Right now, we have a system where most people vote by party loyalty, and that is just their team spirit and a question of mobilization. But that doesn't really tell you much about what I would view as the will of the people.
right.
So we need deliberative voters. We need and that would, if we could spread this process, it would change the whole character of our society.
I agree 100%. And I've been, promoting as much as I could this kind of thing, although, the particular format would vary. And no doubt I will promote something, a changed opinion. But, I've been frequently in touch recently with a guy named Paul Zeitz, who's a physician who's actually going to be, you mentioned the fact that there are different entry points besides elections. And his notion is that the U.S. Constitution needs a refreshing, and he's setting up assemblies or meetings of people in a number of different states, 6 or 8 different states, with the idea of having the outcome be suggestions for changing the U.S. Constitution. And I think he's going to, if he hasn't already invited you, I'm sure he's going to invite you to share your suggestions with him about how to host these things, because he's really pretty far along with it. And I think it's a great idea, but it's a whole lot more ambitious. Well, I would say it's a whole lot more ambitious than what I would try, but it's not quite true, because one of my ultimate goals would be to have a UN Parliamentary Assembly on top of the General Assembly and the Security Council and so on, another house of the UN, but it would be representative of the people and not of nations, and that it would be constituted by some sort of citizens assembly, sortition based selection of people to deliberate year round, or at least many times a year by Zoom, on all of the issues that would be coming up normally in the UN. I think that could be set up even before the UN did it. If some billionaire wanted to contribute the money, it wouldn't even be very expensive to do with Zoom and cell phones and things. And especially when people get to the point that they can translate, and when AI can translate every language into every other language efficiently and quickly and effectively, which is pretty good. It's getting closer, but it's not quite there yet. But people tell me they don't like the idea of having deliberations by video or Zoom kinds of conversations, that many of the people who believe in citizens' assemblies would think you have to actually bring people together physically. They don't trust the outcome of these virtual conversations. Tell me about your thoughts on that.
Well, we do both. We still do face-to-face national deliberative polls because the media likes to cover them better. They like to watch excerpts of the discussions, and we've done quite a few that way. Out of the 160 total that we've done, most of them are face-to-face discussions. It's only the last few years that we've been doing the online process, but our online process, we did we find that people like it. Maybe after COVID, people are more used to doing things on Zoom. But the particular format that we have is not just a Zoom discussion, but it replaces the moderator. And the way that we do it, the people like it because in a way, in each small group of 10, the pace of the discussion, the 10 people are taking a series of decisions where they're in control of the discussion, but with certain ground rules. So in any case, they evaluate it just as highly as the best of the human moderators. And we also did an experiment in Finland for the parliament there. In European countries, most of them have something called the initiative, where if you get 50,000 signatures, say, the parliament has to respond in some way.
Hmm.
And many of these are sort of populist propositions, and the parliament actually doesn't know what to do with them. So, with my Finnish collaborator, Kimmo Grönlund from Abo Akademi in Turku, we did we got the parliament to sponsor a national deliberative poll of about 600 people who were divided into three conditions uh, about four initiative proposals that the parliament, different committees in the parliament were interested in. And so on those four proposals and the three conditions, one condition was face to face. That one third of the sample, 200 and some, were brought from all over the country to Helsinki, where I was, where I observed it. One third did it on Zoom with human moderators who were carefully trained by us in the way we normally train them. And one third did it on our platform, our online platform, where there was no moderator.
Hmm.
It turned out the results were essentially the same in all three conditions.
Hmm.
So we view that as proof positive that we had that we have a good replacement for the human moderators. Not that we don't like human moderators. If it is face to face, it would be awkward not to have a moderator. But in this case, the machine moderated the discussions in a very uniform and fair way, and it didn't insert any of its own opinions.
Hmm.
And it and the people liked it. So we we think that the technology can be used constructively because the
Hmm.
thing about the technology is we invented it to scale to millions of people.
Yeah.
We're just trying to find the right partners in the right country to demonstrate that that is possible. I think I may have found one, but we'll see if it actually happens. But they certainly tell me it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So,
Oh boy, I wish I could be participate in that one because that's exactly my notion of how to get. I mean, I just think if we de-emphasize national borders and sovereignty and all that, I think that's good chunk of the whole climate and other the poly crisis that we face
mhm.
is nationalism and national identity and the rivalry between states and so on. So
Yeah, yeah. But
anything that makes
the other part is partisanship.
yeah,
I
right.
mean, the partisanship is what is tearing us apart.
Now
It's
that's
my
another thing because this woman Ellen Landemore
Yeah, she's a
is
friend of mine.
arguing against parties, saying that
Yeah.
you can get past even having parties, and I'm very interested in that argument because I'm not sure what to think about that. I would love it if I could believe that it could be done. Tell me what you think about that.
Yeah, well, I have a few pages. She's a friend of mine,
Oh,
and I greatly respect her, but I disagree with her respectfully, and have a few pages of criticism if you see that in the book.
I
Uh,
did, but I'm not going to recount your
so I don't look. She wants sortition without elections, at least in that book.
uh,
Uh, and I look, people died for the right to vote.
uh,
Uh, the participation in elections reaches everybody who's eligible.
mm,
Uh, and that kind of participation is a value in itself. And it's a way for us collectively to hold our representatives accountable. And if we didn't have that, if we just had sortition and random selection on various issues, we would get, lots of us would never get to have our views count on issues that we care about. Suppose I'm selected for the electric utility regulation, and you're selected for whether the SNAP benefits should be discontinued. I have a view about whether the SNAP benefits should be discontinued. I think they should not be, but I'd like my votes to count on that. And you may not even have a view about electric utility regulation. Most people don't. But in other words, it would all be divided up in a way that it would make it would disintegrate our opportunities for holding our representatives accountable or decision makers accountable. It's hard to see that they would be representatives. So I think that what we need to do is to tame the spirit of party. You know, George Washington's farewell address, which is read ironically, and every new Congress has a discussion about how the spirit of party is coming. There weren't political parties at the beginning of the American Republic, but the spirit of party he saw was coming. And he said, unless we moderate it, it will destroy the Republic. And the way to moderate it was Madison helped write that. And Madison did not envision political parties at the time of the founding or in the Federalist Papers, but he did worry about the mischiefs of faction. And factions were groups that were actuated by some common passion or interest to against the rights of others or the permanent aggregate interests of the community. And he thought that deliberation would cure the mischiefs of faction. But who was going to deliberate? The Senate was supposed to deliberate. The Constitutional Convention was supposed to deliberate. Even the Electoral College was supposed to deliberate, to show you how different it was at its inception. So we don't have that kind of deliberation now. We just have party loyalty run amok. So, but both Madison and Washington thought that that deliberation would cure the mischiefs of faction, would refine and enlarge the public's views by passing them through a chosen body of citizens, that is, the elected representatives. They didn't really think the people would deliberate. My research program is to demonstrate that the people are fully capable of deliberating, which they are. They're not running for re-election. They don't have the spirit of party in the same way. They're movable to consider the public interest because, after all, they're the people who have to live with the consequences. So what we need to do is to spread deliberation so that there's not this intense base that can be called into being and mobilized by the competing political parties, and so that elections are more than just a tug of war between two big national forces, but actually have a discussion based upon the merits of the policies. In any case, we have a lot of evidence that the people are quite capable of deliberating and that it would do the system a lot of good.
Thank you so much, James, for this talk. It's the most inspiring talk about democracy and about people's ability to take part in it for many years, from my point of view. Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
it sounds incredible. What is usually the reaction of the authorities to this type of, I would say, intervention? So I would say sounds so unusual that it's not so easy to imagine how they react on that.
Well, very often, major political figures, when they have a problem, find that they can convene or help sponsor or at least tolerate a national deliberative poll, whose results will help them share responsibility for a solution. If you've got a problem where no matter what you do, somebody's going to be really mad, you could. So I'll give you an example. A few years ago, President Moon of South Korea came into office, and he had these two half-built nuclear reactors, Shingori 5 and 6. His party was anti-nuclear, but his party was also committed to support actions for climate change. So what was he going to do? If he completed the reactors, he would seem to be going against his party manifesto. Uh, if he didn't complete the reactors, he was going to have to import a lot of fossil fuels, which would also go against his party manifesto. So it was a hard choice. So we had done a number of projects in South Korea before, and deliberative polling was well known there. So to my surprise, he announced that he was convening a national deliberative poll. He was appointing an elaborate scientific committee to supervise all the arguments and vet the materials for and against. And he was going to let the people decide. And whatever they came out with, should they build the reactors or should they not? And there was a substantial movement in favor of completing the reactors, and that's what he did. So that was an example of
Mhm.
How it works.
yeah, how it worked.
I
It was
think
because
that's famously how it began with Ireland too, about abortion, and I think they also did about gay marriage, right?
yeah, that's true. But that's true. But the Citizens Assembly, look, all the critiques of deliberative democracy, when I started, I was almost the first. There was just one other scholar who was talking about deliberative democracy, but he was talking about it entirely in terms of an interpretation of Madison's account of what representatives ought to do. It was Joe Bassett who wrote a book called The Mild Voice of Reason.
Mm.
I use the term deliberative democracy to apply to the people. And my research program is about whether the people can deliberate. So I was in at the beginning. Uh, then citizens' assemblies grew up first in Canada and British Columbia, and then in many places around the world. They're easy to do, but in addition to the sampling problem, they have to come to a consensus, and they often have to take a year or 2 years. Notice what I said about the French one. And so, but it's hard to get even 150 people to agree to come to a consensus. And it's like the problem with a jury verdict. All the critiques of deliberative democracy come out of the very extensively studied jury. The jury literature is very large. And juries have some juries, if it limited to the basic activity of deciding on a question of fact, they do all right. But there's a lot of the push for consensus is distorting. As Cass Sunstein showed in experiments, it leads to movements to extremity, particularly on jury verdicts that have where there's an amount of damages awarded. That's how he started that. And also, the juries are often dominated by the white male educated participants. We don't get any domination in our process. We demonstrate that. And we just get the individual opinions and confidential questionnaires at the end. If there's a consensus, we see it in the data. And so we know that we're getting the considered judgments of the people. And very often, they come to agree or nearly agree, but we respect the disagreement. So it's a different model than the Citizens
Yeah,
Assembly.
but what's the purpose? I mean, what's the outcome of your document at the
It,
end?
it's a representation of what the people really would think about an issue, representing and respecting the people who disagree about it.
So if they're divided, it shows up as the
It
thing
may be,
divided.
but often the divisions are greatly lessened by the deliberation, as I described. Uh,
Mhm.
so you can move to an overall consensus in the sense that if you get a movement from 40%. So in Bulgaria, on the condition of the Roma, we one of the things that we did a big national project on the condition of the Roma, and the percentage of people willing to support desegregating the schools for the Roma and including the Roma children in the schools with everybody else, even though they would have to be bused, went from 42% to 64% or something like that. That was taken as a green light by the authorities for the notion that they could indeed desegregate the schools, which they did. And so we contributed to that. I'm not saying we caused it, but we were a catalyst for that. And so they didn't all 100% of the several hundred people have to agree, but that was the movement of opinion, and there were coherent reasons why they did that. That was written up in the New York Times, and we've also published that in the Journal of Communication. Uh, but that was the kind of movement that we got. So I take that as a mandate, and they took it as a mandate for action.
Mhm. Well, I really would love to use some of your technology. I don't have a an app that will do things like tell people when they've spoken 40 seconds and they have to be quiet. I have to do that myself. But so I think it would be very interesting to see the kinds of differences that occur when you use this mechanical device that times
Well, yeah,
people
it's not just that, but that's one part of it. By the
yeah.
way, it turns out the ancient Athenians also limited the time. They had these little water clocks,
Oh
which
yeah.
which had a small which were of a certain size and had a hole of a certain size. And so, for different purposes, you could speak for 45 seconds, or for other purposes, you could speak up to 6 minutes. And so, they use these water clocks and an ancient technology of a timer to make sure that nobody talked too much.
That's wonderful. I like that. I had a forum or a conversation like this with Calypso Nicolaides, and I think she knows your folks. And as she, of course, is she's a retired professor of political science, I guess, at Oxford, but as Greek, she has been convening a European citizens assembly, and they are from every country, and it's done by sortition. It's done properly, and they meet that their one of their meetings was in the place Pnyx or whatever I don't know how to pronounce it
Yeah, yeah. The
in
Pnyx is where the assembly met.
yeah.
Yeah.
So they held their one of their first, maybe it was their first deliberations there, and that now they go every year or every I don't know how often, but when they meet in a different city in Europe because she is, I guess, of the persuasion that you really do need a face-to-face kind of contact, and she wants her people to get to know each other and go out to meals together and whatnot, which is lovely. But I think one could simulate some of that by breakout groups and things on Zoom. I'm thinking in terms of how to make this practical, and it's a long way before anybody is going to come up with the money to do a global citizens movement inquiry
Well,
of any kind.
we did a global deliberation.
Did you?
Uh, yes, but it was on a specialized topic. It was on the metaverse, bullying and harassment in the metaverse.
Mhm.
And it was not only a global deliberation, but we had a global control group too.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
and it was about, the metaverse is an immersive reality which has unexpected psychological effects because you really think you're experiencing it. And if you're bullied, it can be brutal. So Meta wanted some ground rules, which we provided.
I'm
In
sorry, do they use virtual these things
No,
in
no, our deliberators were just like this on the seeing each other on the platform. But the metaverse is on. You use headphones to get into the metaverse to make it a three-dimensional reality.
uh,
Uh, and So it was pretty successful. And in
really?
fact, one of my to-do lists is to finish writing up a revised version of that for publication.
Well, about a year ago or a little more, I participated about 4 times in an experiment that I was extremely impressed with. There were maybe a dozen, mostly young people in different countries, and they did a citizens' assembly. But of course, you couldn't use sortition exactly, but there was a representation from various countries and various social classes and so on. There was a working class man from Colombia, I think, and we all had it was all set up so that I would, if he's speaking Spanish, I would read the English translation
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. We've experimented with that, but
yeah.
we always use sortition in the sense of stratified random sampling, and we did a couple European wide also for all
Mhm.
of Europe.
Okay.
In fact, you'll see a film about one of our projects called Europe in One Room on our website.
Wonderful. Well, how are we going to get from to there? Doing that on a big scale or regularly, or I want to boost this as much as I can because I think it's probably the most constructive thing that a person can do these days to handle and get good answers to some of the diverse global threats that we all face. I mean, Project Save the World addresses six global threats, including, famine and all kinds of things, and cyber and war and weapons and climate and so on. And we really would like to have an ongoing uh, pretty substantial inquiry along the lines that we're experimenting with this time, but on particular topics, one after another. But I'd love to make it really representative and global in scope. We have a few people right now on the one that we're doing, a couple from India and one, there are various places, one from Tashkent, who's actually Russian, and so on. Um, so it's possible, but we have to make that a cause, I think. And I would love to be able to see how do you have game plan for how to really implement this on a significant scale so that people take it seriously and it becomes a real factor in
Well,
the
read the
political.
last chapter of my book, which is about that.
I
But
have a little, but I mean, I want you to tell me things.
Well, no, there's so many occasions, so many arenas of life where deliberation could have constructive effects and I catalog a bunch of them. And my book starts with ancient Athens, and I ended with ancient Athens because the thing about Athens, which I find so fascinating, and by the way, you can see the speech I gave at the Athens Democracy Forum a few weeks ago that is on my website. Uh, but the thing that fascinated me most was Aristotle's comment that each person would, each male citizen, of course, it was restricted to male citizens, but each citizen would rule and be ruled in turn. There was a rotation method. And that's usually been dismissed as something only suitable for a very small city state. But once I started cataloging all the arenas in life, modern life, in which deliberation would serve a useful function, I realized that you could practice the rotation method at the large scale and create a more deliberative society. And that's the ultimate message of my book. And I've got all these different areas, which apart from the deliberation day, we've actually piloted almost every single one of them. I piloted, I said, we've done one project like that. And I think there could be many more. So, I'm only one person and I'm sort of laying the, I feel like a Johnny Appleseed and
Yeah.
I'm laying the trail
Uh-huh.
that could be followed if we can get more people involved to do this. And
Well,
when
I
I
got,
started, I was completely alone. Everybody said, that's a wacky idea. Don't pay any attention to it. But now there's a whole interdisciplinary field around the world of people trying to do various versions. I happen to think that my version is more, well, how should I say this? More defensible and and practical than some of the other versions, the citizen juries and the citizens assemblies, but they all engage the wisdom of the public and tap into the wisdom of the people, and that's ultimately very important. But it's better if you collect the data so that you can show that it's representative and thoughtful and identify the reasons why people change their opinions the way that they do, because those reasons have consequences for policymakers and allows us to solve our problems together.
Well, I have an apple seed to add to your collection, Johnny. And that is you mentioned that there are many different domains in social life that could benefit from using this approach. And I quite agree, but I also think that the realm of private business,
Mhm.
we're told that you have a voice in government, or you should if you lived in a democracy, but you have nothing to say about what what happens with the corporation that you happen to be involved with.
I agree completely. That's why we did that project with Meta, and we're now actually doing a number of projects with major firms involved in AI in one way or another to get feedback from the public about what AI should do or should not do. We're even about to have an industry-wide forum with a whole bunch of the major companies. You can see an announcement on our website about the sort of what AI should be used for
Mhm.
or maybe not used for. And we're going to do that actually in the next 2 weeks.
I
So,
want to see the results for sure. It'll
mhm.
probably be something that I'll ask everybody on our inquiry to read and to we'll
Well,
talk.
we will publish that, of course.
Yeah,
And
but how long? I mean, I want it as fast as possible.
yeah, but the remarkable thing is we got these six companies to all agree
Uh,
that here was an agenda.
Well, here's
And
my angle on corporate things is, I believe that the complaint department in a corporation, let's say I have a grievance with the way I've been treated with in my local department store, and I've taken this thing in and shown it to them, and they say it's your own fault, you mistreated the equipment, and of course I hadn't, and I have no recourse. So I think that every company should have a panel, citizens panel, and you can go around and ask people to volunteer in the community to be on it. Six or eight people who will look at the complaints that
yeah, it's a
people bring, and the company should pay attention if they recommend that. Yeah,
yeah.
you could
Yeah,
refer
I
them to
agree with that.
this.
Unfortunately, I have another Zoom I have to do at 1 o'clock, so
Right.
I'm
Well,
going to
I
have to
got
say
your
goodbye. But it's a
attention.
pleasure. I hope you'll send me a copy of a link to whatever you
Yeah,
produce. And it's a
absolutely.
pleasure meeting you both.
It's thrilled. Thank you so much.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you so much. Yeah,
Good
take care.
wishes. Okay, bye.